Sports anime and me have not always meshed well. In fact, they very rarely have meshed well with me. And the main reason for that is simply because I tend to struggle to care if I don't really find whatever's going on with the characters and what they're trying to achieve to be all that interesting. If the characters are really only trying to be the best at whatever their sport is, and that's all the plot is, and there's not much else to it, I struggle to find it all that memorable. I struggle to keep my interest because I don't care about what the characters care about, and the characters in the show don't usually make me care about what they care about. And the Initial D really, at the end of the day, is no different, for better or for worse. But it didn't start out that way. So even though I do not have a personal attachment to street racing, I was still able to find the first 3 stages of Initial D to be entertaining enough. They were something I could have on and not really mind watching. They weren't amazing. I didn't love them, but I didn't hate them. They weren't boring. There was enough there to hold my interest despite not really caring that much about street racing. And I think there were a few reasons for this. One, enough time was spent, especially in first stage, setting up the races and introducing the characters and ultimately making the races have something to them to make them distinct, that I could at least care enough to want to watch it, even if I wasn't enthralled. And this more or less continues into second stage, although second stage doesn't have as much time to it as first stage does. And on top of that, I tended to find the strategies that were used in the races more interesting than I would have expected, for the most part. The one that sticks out the most in my mind is actually from third stage, the race where Takumi, the main character, is racing and more or less wins by taking a strategic chance on where the leaves are going to be on the road, and tries to make sure that he's on the opposite side of the road and his opponent is on that road, so his opponent runs into the leaves and spins out and he wins. And that's a pretty cool strategy, and stuff like that was enough to make me remember the races as distinct entities rather than them all kind of blurring together. Unfortunately, that did not last throughout the show's entire 81 episode run. Once we get to fourth stage and the Project D arc, a lot of these qualities that kept me interested enough in the show start to fade away. The Project D arc has so many races again and again and again, and they do all more or less blend together in my mind because they're not that interesting. The characters that are being raced don't have that much time to make them feel distinct. They more or less just get a gimmick that makes them the toughest racer that Takumi has ever raced before, because this one's a professional racer and this one has a particular car and whatever. And okay, but gimmicks don't carry everything on their own. Like, yeah, they can help to make a race try to feel distinct, but that's not enough, especially when every race starts to feel like it's won in the same way. Takumi has to turn off his lights because it's dark out, and his opponent can't see him, and that allows Takumi to pass him, and then the opponent spins out, and rinse, wash, repeat. And then on top of that, at this point, we're not just watching Takumi race, we're also having to watch Keisuke do a race as well. So every time we go somewhere and have a race, we actually have 2 races to watch. And the Keisuke races also kind of just blur together and feel too samey. And this was where I started to get really, really bored and was actively forcing myself to sit through everything just so I could finish the show. Because at this point, I was already like halfway through. Project D is like 42 of the 81 episodes. And at that point, once you've seen 3 stages, it's hard for me, at least, to drop a show at that point. If this was still in the first stage, it would be a lot easier because I could say, all right, I tried it. I didn't get too far into it. I feel okay dropping it. But once I've seen that much of it, I feel like I might as well just finish it to have a full opinion. So that's ultimately what ended up happening. I forced my way through 4th stage and 5th stage and final stage and did not enjoy much of it. But there's another reason why I particularly do not like that back half of the show. And part of it has to do with how the romances are handled among various characters. For whatever reason, Initial D seems to have this vendetta against having successful romances, with like one exception, which we'll get to. And I don't know why it is. I don't know if the original author had some sort of issue personally with how romances worked and maybe had some bad experiences and tried to write them in, but it really makes things particularly unsatisfying for most of them and makes you kind of wonder, why did we even set this up and have this take up so much time if it was just going to end like this? So, for example, Natsuki. Natsuki, at first, is more or less a main character in the show and is Takemi's main love interest. And for the first 3 stages, while yes, they have rocky moments to say the least, you wouldn't really get the impression that she would be going anywhere. But at the end of 3rd stage, she does. But even so, most people, I would imagine, would think, well, she'll return at some point. Nope. That's it. She's gone. Other than some flashbacks remembering her, she never shows up again after 3rd stage. She's not in anything else. That's it. It's just jarring. Like, you spent so much time on her dynamic with Takemi, through all the ups and the downs, and then she's just gone. Why? Why even do this? I mean, if you want to take her out of the show for a bit, sure, but like, why wouldn't you just bring her back later? It boggles my mind, especially when the show in 5th stage introduces a character called Mika. And Mika very quickly, almost out of nowhere, becomes Takemi's new love interest. She is a dead ringer for Natsuki. She looks exactly like her. And none of the characters point this out, of course, but she basically is a clone of Natsuki. It just she plays golf. That's the difference. She plays golf. And you could excise her entirely from the show and it wouldn't matter. She contributes nothing to the story going forward, whereas Natsuki did. Natsuki and the ups and downs of her relationship with Takemi did very much so affect how some of the races went, how the plot went. Mika doesn't impact anything. She could be cut entirely and it wouldn't change a single thing. She is not even really a character at the end of the day, and I don't understand why you wouldn't just bring Natsuki back. Why would you make a new character who looks exactly like her and have her contribute nothing when you could just bring back the character who was a main character before, but you just decided to get rid of? I don't get it. I really don't. But she is certainly not the worst offender. We've got a few more to talk about. So, what about Kyoko, right? Kyoko is introduced in 4th stage and very quickly falls in love with Keisuke. And the whole issue with her and Keisuke throughout 4th stage is that Keisuke is very reluctant to have a relationship when he wants to focus on his racing. All right, fair enough. That makes sense. You would think over the course of the season, they would work that out and ultimately they might end up together eventually, right? And Kyoko actually does contribute certain times to the plot and helps advance it, and you start to see Keisuke actually warm up to her, but then Keisuke still puts his foot down, says, no, I don't want to be in a relationship, and that's it. She's just gone from the show, never shows up again, is never mentioned again, and it makes you wonder, why did we waste our time on this? Like, not that they had to end up together, but you'd think that she would still feel like a relevant character, because she was, to some degree in fourth stage, relevant to other things. But then she's just gone, as if she never even was there. And it's weird. It's weird to look back at these characters who were relevant and think, wow, they just disappeared. They just ended up not being relevant in the long run. What about perhaps the most infamous one of them all in my mind, Kazumi? This one infuriates me the most out of all of them, because one of the things I actually liked the most about second stage was Kazumi's dynamic with Itsuki, which starts to get focused towards the end of that season. I genuinely thought they had a good dynamic and they fit well with each other. And even though they weren't able to be together by the end of second stage, things still ended on a positive note for the two of them. And if Kazumi never showed up again, I would have been fine with it, because at least that dynamic was left in a somewhat satisfying place, and you could at least hope that eventually maybe they'd see each other again. But they actually do see each other again in fourth stage, and it makes you think, oh, will they actually get to be together? What's going to happen? If only. Kazumi shows up because Wataru shows up, and Wataru's her brother. Now, even though Wataru shows up later in like fifth stage without Kazumi, I guess for whatever reason they felt like at this point they had to have them show up together, which I don't think they needed to. It could have easily just had Wataru there by himself. But whatever. Kazumi's there, and she and Itsuki go on an actual date, only for us to find out that Kazumi is mostly just doing this so she can spend time with someone who's kind of consistent and comfortable, because she's struggling with her actual boyfriend. And at the end, she just ends up going back to her boyfriend, and we never see her again. She's mentioned a couple times in the following episode where characters are like, well, Itsuki's got to get over her. And that's it. Never shows up again. They took what was a nice, albeit bittersweet, resolution to her and Itsuki's potential romance in second stage and completely tore it apart in fourth stage. For what reason? It's not like they did this and then had Kazumi do other things and be a relevant character with other respects. No, she never shows up again. They bring her back in fourth stage just to ruin one of the nicer things about second stage. And now it's like, how can I look back at what happened there, something that I did genuinely like about second stage, and look at it in a positive light, knowing where it goes, knowing that they took something nice and completely ruined it for no reason. It's not like this benefited the plot. It's not like this really mattered all that much to Itsuki's development in the long run, and Kazumi just never shows up again. So what was the point? What was the point of any of it at the end of the day? To me, there is none. And stuff like that really pisses me off. And then there's also Mako. Now, Mako at least was like a character in her own right, and even though the show kind of screws around unnecessarily with her potential romance with Ikitani, at least like that one also kind of ends in a pretty all right spot, even though they don't end up together in Extra Stage 2, only for at the very end they just flash across the screen and they never saw each other again, which doesn't even make sense, because there's no way they didn't see each other at the end in Extra Stage. Like, literally no chance they didn't see each other and talk to each other there. But anyway, that's also just like, why would you go out of your way to just throw that in for like the last seconds of a special and just say, yeah, they never saw each other again? Why do that? It's like you enjoy tearing apart these romances that you've spent all this time setting up. Like, if you don't want to have these characters end up in like positive romantic relationships, don't even bother. Don't waste my time on this. Or you could have just left it in a spot where they don't end up together, but at least things end on a positive note. But twice, the show showed it could not do that. It's like there was just something tempting the writer to just tear apart anything nice. And I cannot stand it. I truly, truly hate that happens. And it actively ruins stuff from stages of the show that I actually liked, especially in the case of Kazumi. I hate how that happened. I hate how that planned out. Oh, I do not like it. Not in the slightest. So, even though a lot of my dislike for where initially ends up going is because it just gets really boring and repetitive, and in a lot of ways it reminds me of other sports anime that I've watched. Most specifically, I would say Kuroko's Basketball. That one was another sports anime where it started off okay. It was an okay thing to have on. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. And the more it went on, the more the matches got repetitive and boring, and the more I started to dislike it. Initially goes through a very similar process where it starts off okay and starts to get more and more unwatchable. But unlike Kuroko, initially has this added aspect of it that just really, really, really infuriates me. So at the end of the day, the Eurobeat may be bopping, and the first few stages may have been alright. But much like Takumi when he's racing, Initial D goes downhill quick.